The venue had been booked for 8 months. My parents quietly canceled it and redirected the $8,000 deposit to my brother's business. They told me the day before my tasting appointment. I nodded, set down my fork, and said I have to make a call. My grandmother picked up on the first ring. "My name is Ruby Morris. I am 29 years old. I work as a senior medical auditor here in New York. If there is a missing dollar in a hospital billing department, I find it. I trace unauthorized transfers, unearth hidden ledgers, and document fraud. I spend 40 hours a week tracking people who think they are clever enough to take what is not theirs. I just never expected to have to audit my own parents. Before I explain exactly how I dismantled my family facade in front of 150 high society guests, take a second to like this video and subscribe. Drop a comment with your city and local time. I like knowing who is out there listening. The unraveling started on a Tuesday afternoon at a bistro in Midtown Manhattan. It was the kind of place where sparkling water costs $9, and the ambient noise forces you to lean across the marble table just to be heard. I sat across from my parents, Patricia and David. I had my wedding planner open, running a silver pen down the itinerary for the upcoming menu tasting at the historic Hudson Valley estate I had booked back in January. The estate was a restored stone manor overlooking the river. It was beautiful, elegant, and most importantly, it was mine. I paid the $8,000 deposit myself using money I saved from 2 consecutive performance bonuses. I did not ask my parents for a dime. I knew better than to ask them for anything. "So the executive chef wants us there by 2 o'clock, I said, tapping the date on the page. "We can finalize the hors d'oeuvres, and Liam is meeting us after his strategy meeting." My mother took a slow sip of her Chardonnay. She did not look at the planner. She looked at the rim of her glass. "Ruby, about the tasting," Patricia began. Her tone carried the breezy cadence she usually reserved for discussing the weather or commenting on a neighbor's landscaping. "We went ahead and canceled it. The estate, too." My pen stopped moving. The restaurant hummed around us. Waiters carried trays of oysters past our table. A group of executives laughed near the brass bar. For a second, I thought I had misheard her over the clatter of silverware. "You canceled my wedding venue." "Well, the deposit was sitting there," my father chimed in. He sliced into his steak without making eye contact. $8,000 is a lot of capital to tie up in a party. Your brother needed it." "Mohoyo." Jackson. My 27-year-old brother, the aspiring tech entrepreneur who had never actually sold a single piece of software. Jackson was the golden boy. He was a self-proclaimed innovator, which was a polite way of saying he spent the last 5 years launching startups that never produced any actual technology. "Jackson's app is at a critical juncture," Patricia added. She placed her manicured hand over mine, adopting a posture of maternal comfort. "He needed the cash to float his developers. We requested the refund on your behalf and transferred it to his business account." "You are smart, Ruby. You and Liam make good money. You will find something else. Family supports family." They did not ask. They did not borrow. They assumed. They looked at the money I earned, the money I saved from working 60-hour weeks auditing medical records, and decided it belonged to Jackson. Most brides would flip the marble table. They would burst into tears, demand the money back, and cause a scene right there in the middle of the Midtown lunch rush. But I am an auditor. When numbers do not align, I do not panic. My training takes over. My heart rate dropped. The noise of the bistro faded into a sharp clinical silence. I looked at Patricia's hand resting on mine. I looked at David methodically chewing his food. I realized they were not waiting for my permission. They were waiting for my compliance. They expected me to swallow the loss just like I swallowed every other loss when it came to my brother. When I graduated college, my parents skipped my ceremony to bail Jackson out of a bad apartment lease. When I bought my own modest co-op in Queens, they did not offer a housewarming gift, but they co-signed a loan for Jackson's first failed business venture. I was the invisible workhorse. Jackson was the investment. I slid my hand out from under my mother's palm. "I see," I said. My voice was level. "Ruby, do not pout," my father said, pointing his fork at me. "It is just one day. Jackson is building a legacy for this family. You should be proud to contribute." "A legacy with my money," I stated, keeping my tone flat. "It is family money." Patricia corrected me, her smile tightening. "We are all in this together. We can look at the country club tomorrow. They have some Thursday afternoon dates available. It will be budget-friendly." She had already planned the downgrade. She had already mapped out how to hide my wedding in a cheap basement on a weekday so Jackson could play chief executive officer with my savings. I closed my planner. I capped my silver pen. I stood up from the table and pulled my trench coat over my arm. "Ruby, where are you going?" Patricia frowned, the breeze finally dropping from her voice. "We still need to discuss the alternative locations. Liam will be expecting a plan." "I have to make a call," I said. I took a $20 bill from my wallet and set it on the marble table over my untouched salad. I turned my back on them and walked out the brass-handled doors. The crisp November air hit my face the second I stepped onto Fifth Avenue. Yellow cabs blurred past. Pedestrians bumped my shoulder, rushing back to their offices. I stood on the pavement and pulled out my phone. I bypassed Liam's contact. I bypassed my friends. I scrolled down and dialed the one person in the Morris family who understood the true value of $1. Evelyn, my 78-year-old grandmother. Evelyn was a widow who lived quietly upstate. Patricia and David treated her like a fragile old woman who needed to be managed. They severely underestimated her. Evelyn had built a quiet real estate fortune decades ago, and she watched my parents fumble their finances with silent, razor-sharp judgment. She was the only person in the family who saw me. She picked up before the second ring. "Grandma," I said, watching the traffic light change at the intersection. "Mom and Dad canceled the Hudson Valley estate. They gave my deposit to Jackson." Silence hung on the line. I heard the faint rustle of fabric. Evelyn did not gasp. She did not offer empty platitudes or tell me everything would be fine. She processed the data exactly the way I did. "I am in the city," Evelyn said. Her voice was pure steel over the receiver. "Give me 10 minutes. Get in the car." 10 minutes later, a pristine navy blue 1998 Lincoln Continental glided to a stop at the curb. The car did not roar or draw attention to itself. It just idled flawlessly, a heavy piece of American steel separating itself from the chaotic flow of yellow cabs and delivery trucks. I opened the heavy door and slid into the leather passenger seat. The interior smelled faintly of peppermint and old expensive upholstery. The street noise vanished the second the door clicked shut. Evelyn did not look like a typical 78-year-old grandmother. She wore a tailored charcoal wool coat and a silk scarf draped perfectly around her neck. Her posture was uncompromisingly straight, her silver hair styled in a sharp, elegant cut. She put the car into gear and pulled into the dense midtown traffic with the calm precision of someone who never second-guesses a blind spot. "Tell me the exact words Patricia used," Evelyn said. She kept her eyes on the road, her hands resting at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. I recounted the lunch. I repeated the breezy, casual tone my mother used to drop the bomb. I explained the cancellation of the historic estate, the unprompted refund, and the swift transfer of $8,000 into Jackson's limited liability company. Evelyn did not gasp. She did not express shock. She processed the data the same way I did, sorting the information into cold, hard facts. Her hands tightened on the leather steering wheel. Her knuckles went a pale shade of white. "They stole $8,000, Evelyn stated. It was not a question. It was a final tally. "The money you saved from your auditing bonuses." I nodded, watching the city storefronts blur past the passenger window. This was the pattern. This was the established dynamic of the Morris family. Jack failed, and my parents rushed to pad his landing using my milestones as the cushion. I was 22 years old when I graduated from college. I had spent 4 years working part-time in a billing department to avoid drowning in student debt. On graduation day, I stood on the campus green in my cap and gown. The May sun was beating down on the grass. All around me, classmates were popping champagne and posing for photographs with their beaming families. I scanned the crowd for over an hour, holding my diploma cover. My parents never showed. David called me 2 hours after the ceremony ended. His voice was frantic, unapologetic, and rushed. He told me Jackson had broken a commercial lease for a customized sneaker boutique that never even opened its doors. The landlord was threatening legal action. While I was walking across a stage to accept my degree, my parents were sitting in a fluorescent-lit lawyer's office in Hoboken, draining their savings account to bail out the golden boy. They told me I was strong and independent, and that I would understand. Evelyn knew all of this. She had watched David, her own son, funnel his middle management salary into Jackson's pipe dreams for half a decade. Patricia and David treated Evelyn like she was a fragile widow, clutching a modest pension. They thought she spent her days watching television in her upstate house. They had no idea Evelyn owned 4 commercial properties in Soho, purchased in the late 1970s, when the city was financially drowning. She collected rent from high-end retail stores and corporate art galleries. She recognized a terrible investment when she saw one, and Jackson was a terrible investment. I was the only person who inherited her mind for numbers. I bought my 2-bedroom apartment in Queens at 25. I paid my own mortgage. I asked for nothing. That venue deposit was supposed to be the one thing that was entirely mine. "Jackson's new venture," Evelyn murmured, navigating the heavy traffic toward the bridge. "What is the product this time?" I shook my head, feeling a familiar exhaustion settle into my shoulders. "An app. Something about optimizing local supply chains for small businesses. He does not have actual developers. He has fraternity brothers who play table tennis in a rented office and call themselves disruptors." Evelyn let out a short, sharp exhale. It was not a laugh. It was an audit. She was categorizing the delusion. "Do not cry over this ruby," she said softly. "Tears are a currency your mother thrives on. They make her feel needed. You keep your accounts locked." "I know," I replied. "I just need to talk to Liam. He is going to be furious. We picked that estate together. His parents are inviting half of his consulting firm. He will know how to handle the optics with David and Patricia. He will make them return the funds." Evelyn turned the steering wheel, merging onto the bridge. She did not say anything else. Her silence carried a heavy, specific weight, but I chose to ignore it. I wanted to believe my fiancé was my partner. I needed someone in my corner who would stand up to the entitlement. We arrived outside my building in Astoria. It was a modest brick cooperative, unassuming but rock solid. I thanked my grandmother and stepped out onto the concrete sidewalk. "Call me when the dust settles," Evelyn said through the open passenger window. "We will review the ledger." The heavy door clicked shut. The Lincoln pulled away from the curb. I walked into the lobby, took the elevator to the 4th floor, and stepped out into the quiet hallway. My mind was racing. I was drafting the exact conversation I was about to have with Liam. Liam was a 31-year-old corporate management consultant. He built his career on risk assessment and stakeholder management. He wore tailored wool suits and knew exactly how to de-escalate a hostile boardroom. I expected him to pace our living room, dial my father's number, and demand the immediate return of our stolen deposit. I expected him to protect our future. I slid my key into the brass deadbolt. I turned the lock. I pushed the door open, dropping my keys into the ceramic bowl by the entryway. I could hear voices coming from the living room, not the television. Real voices. I took off my trench coat, hung it in the closet, and turned the corner. My breath caught in my throat. I stood frozen in my own hallway. Jackson was sitting on my mid-century sofa. His expensive designer sneakers were propped up on the edge of my glass coffee table. In his hand was a crystal wine glass holding a dark red Cabernet. I recognized the bottle resting on the granite counter behind him. It was a vintage reserve I had received as a corporate gift, a bottle I explicitly saved for our upcoming rehearsal dinner. Beside him, sitting in the leather armchair, was Liam. Liam was not furious. He was not pacing the floor or dialing my father. Liam was leaning back, swirling his own glass of my vintage wine, laughing at a joke my brother had just delivered. Jackson saw me first. His face broke into a wide, entitled grin. It was the exact expression worn by someone who knows they have already won the game before you even realize you are playing it. He set his feet down on my glass coffee table, stood up from the mid-century sofa, and spread his arms open wide. He was wearing a fleece vest over a crisp button-down shirt, the unofficial uniform of a midtown venture capitalist. Despite the fact that he had never raised a single round of legitimate funding. "Ruby, the best sister ever," Jackson announced, taking a step toward me. I did not step forward to meet his embrace. I stood perfectly still, my eyes tracking the crystal wine glass he had left resting on the table. It was a rare Bordeaux. A chief of surgery had gifted it to me after I recovered $80,000 in misallocated departmental funds. I had been saving it to open on the night of our rehearsal dinner. Jackson had cracked it open on a random Tuesday like it was cheap table wine. I looked back up at his face. "Do not hug me," I said. My voice carried no heat, just a flat, unyielding boundary. Jackson dropped his arms, his confident smile faltering for a fraction of a second before he replaced it with a look of manufactured hurt. "Come on, Ruby," he sighed, running a hand through his carefully styled hair. "I know Mom and Dad told you about the pivot today. I wanted to be there, but I had meetings with developers all morning. You have no idea what your investment means to my vision." "You are basically my primary angel investor now." "I did not invest in your vision, Jackson," I replied, keeping my posture rigid. "You intercepted a venue deposit for a wedding that is taking place in 8 months. How exactly did you justify taking $8,000 that did not belong to you?" Before Jackson could deploy another string of hollow tech startup buzzwords, the deadbolt on my front door clicked behind me. I turned around. Patricia and David pushed into my apartment entryway. My mother was holding a large brown paper bag emitting the smell of expensive Thai takeout. My father was right behind her, unbuttoning his overcoat like he had just arrived for a scheduled family dinner. They had used the emergency spare key I gave them 2 years ago. The ambush was meticulously coordinated. They knew I would confront Liam, so they cornered me in my own sanctuary before I could even take off my shoes. "Perfect timing," Patricia said brightly, stepping around me to carry the takeout bags into the kitchen. "We figured you would be too tired to cook after our lunch. Liam let Jackson up a little early so they could talk shop." I watched my mother open my cabinets and pull out my ceramic plates. They were staging a united front. They were normalizing the theft by burying it under the mundane routine of a family dinner. "Mom, Dad, Jackson," I said, turning to face all three of them. "I need you to leave my apartment right now." My father stopped taking off his coat. He let out a heavy, disappointed sigh, the kind a parent uses when a toddler refuses to eat their vegetables. "Ruby, sit down and eat," David ordered, pointing toward the kitchen island. "You are making a mountain out of a molehill. We knew you would be defensive, which is why we came over to smooth things out." "I am not defensive," I stated, meeting my father's gaze. "I am auditing a theft. You canceled a contract I secured and diverted the funds." "It is just a party, Ruby," Patricia called out from the kitchen, sliding noodles onto a plate. "It is one evening of dancing and eating overpriced chicken. Jackson is building the family legacy. This app is going to revolutionize local logistics." He needed the capital injection to secure his patent lawyer. My brother did not have a patent. He did not have logistics. He had a rented desk in Soho. "A legacy," David echoed, stepping into the living room to stand next to his son. "You are being incredibly materialistic. You are focusing on a fancy stone house and a status symbol wedding when your brother needs actual infrastructure. We raised you to be supportive, not selfish." "Gee!" The psychological weight of the room compressed around me. This was the scapegoat dynamic in its purest, most toxic form. I was the workhorse. My achievements were public resources to be harvested whenever the golden boy stumbled. If I objected, I was the villain. I was materialistic for wanting the wedding I paid for, while Jackson was a visionary for stealing it. I did not argue with my parents. Arguing requires a shared baseline of reality, and we did not share one. Instead, I turned my attention to the man sitting in the leather armchair, Liam. My fiancé had been silent since I walked through the door. He sat there in his tailored wool trousers, holding his glass of my stolen wine. Liam was a corporate management consultant. His entire career was built on risk mitigation, stakeholder alignment, and projecting authority. He dealt with aggressive corporate executives every single day. I expected him to stand up, place himself between me and my family, and demand they leave our home. I expected him to be my partner. Liam set his wine glass on the side table. He stood up, smoothed the front of his expensive shirt, and walked over to me. He did not turn to my parents. He did not confront Jackson. He stopped right in front of me and placed a heavy, placating hand on my forearm. "Ruby, let us take a step back and look at the deliverables here," Liam said. He was using his measured corporate de-escalation voice, the tone he used when a client was unhappy with a quarterly report. I stared at his hand resting on my sleeve. "Your parents have a point," Liam continued, his voice dropping to a soothing register. "We do not need a historic estate to prove we are successful. We can pivot. Your mom already found some great availability at my country club for a Thursday afternoon. It is highly budget-friendly. You are overreacting to the logistics. Let us just find a cheaper venue to keep the peace." The air left my lungs. It was a quiet, invisible fracture, but I felt the exact moment my respect for him shattered. Liam was obsessed with networking. He worshipped the aesthetic of wealth and influence. He did not look at Jackson and see a parasitic failure. He looked at Jackson and saw a potential networking node simply because Jackson used phrases like seed capital and angel investors. Liam chose to sacrifice my dignity to protect his networking opportunities with a fake tech founder. He wanted to keep a clean public relations image with my parents more than he wanted to defend his future wife. I looked at Liam's hand on my arm. I looked at Jackson sipping the wine I earned. I looked at David and Patricia plating food in the kitchen. I paid for the physical space of my living room, felt suffocating. I realized with terrifying clarity that I was utterly alone in my own home. I pulled my arm away from Liam's touch. I took a slow, deliberate step backward, putting physical distance between myself and the man I almost married. "You want to keep the peace?" I asked Liam, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. Liam offered a practiced, handsome smile. "Exactly. We are a Team Ruby. We adapt." Before I could formulate a response to his cowardice, my phone vibrated inside my trench coat pocket. I reached in and pulled it out. The screen illuminated with a new email notification. It was a message from the senior event coordinator at the Hudson Valley estate. The subject line read, "Cancellation confirmation and final documentation." Because I track financial discrepancies for a living, my eyes immediately bypassed the polite corporate greeting and locked onto the attachment. It was a scanned portable document format file of the official cancellation request. I clicked the attachment. The document loaded on my screen. I scanned the itemized list of refunded deposits. Then my eyes dropped to the bottom of the page, resting on the signature line required to authorize the release of the funds. The estate contract was in my name only. My parents were not listed as authorized representatives. Yet there on the digital screen right next to the date was my signature. It was a decent imitation of my handwriting, sweeping and cursive, but the pressure points were entirely wrong. Someone in this room had forged my legal signature to steal $8,000. The heavy click of the mechanism was the only sound in the room. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I needed a larger screen. I needed to look at the evidence the same way I looked at fraudulent hospital billing codes. I opened my email client and clicked the message from the Hudson Valley event coordinator. The portable document format file loaded on my high-definition monitor. It was a standard cancellation form, the kind designed to release the venue from liability and trigger the refund of a deposit. I scrolled past the boilerplate legal text and zoomed in on the bottom of the page. There were two signatures. The first belonged to Patricia Morris. The second claimed to belong to me. I am a trained auditor. My job requires me to spot inconsistencies that people spend weeks trying to hide. I know how to track digital footprints, and I know how to read handwriting. The signature on the screen was a decent visual imitation of my cursive, but the mechanics were entirely wrong. When I sign my name, the pressure is heavy on the downward stroke of the capital letter R, and the loop of the letter Y trails off quickly. The signature on this form had uniform, hesitant pressure. The loops were slow and deliberate. It was the signature of someone carefully copying a shape, not someone quickly writing their own name. Patricia had forged my signature. Then I looked at the routing number listed for the refund destination. It was not Jackson's business account. The venue would never refund an $8,000 credit card deposit to an unrelated third-party limited liability company. They refunded it to a checking account in my name. I recognized the last 4 digits. It was a joint student checking account my mother forced me to open when I was 18 years old. She told me it was an emergency safety net for my college textbooks and medical expenses. I stopped using it the day I graduated and secured my own independent banking. I thought it was dormant. I had forgotten it even existed. Patricia had not forgotten. She used that dormant joint account as a legal backdoor. She forged my signature to authorize the venue refund, routed the $8,000 into the joint checking account, where her name was still listed as a co-owner, and then legally transferred the money out of that account and into Jackson's startup fund. It was a calculated multi-step financial maneuver. It was not just family entitlement. It was wire fraud. It was a felony. I did not feel anger. I felt an icy, terrifying clarity. My mother was willing to risk prison time to buy my brother a few more months of pretending to be a chief executive officer. I clicked the print icon on my screen. The laser printer in the corner of my office hummed to life, sliding a warm sheet of paper into the tray. I picked it up, folded it once, and unlocked my office door. I walked back into the living room. Jackson was eating takeout from one of my ceramic bowls. Patricia and David were sitting at the kitchen island chatting about the weather like it was a normal Tuesday evening. Liam was standing near the window checking his smartwatch. "Liam," I said, my voice cut through the casual chatter. "Step into the office for a minute." He looked up, a flash of annoyance crossing his handsome face. He offered my parents an apologetic smile, playing the role of the patient partner, and followed me down the hallway. I waited for him to cross the threshold. Then, I closed the door behind him. I did not lock it this time. I walked over to my desk and handed him the folded sheet of paper. "Read the bottom line," I instructed. Liam unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned the text. I watched his face, waiting for the exact moment his corporate risk assessment kicked in. I waited for the outrage. I waited for him to realize the people eating noodles in our kitchen had just committed a serious financial crime against his future wife. "That is your signature," Liam said, looking up at me with confusion. "They canceled the venue. We already knew that." "Look closer," I said, keeping my tone perfectly flat. "I did not sign that document. I was at work. My mother forged my signature, routed the venue deposit into an old joint college account, and wired the cash to Jackson." Liam blinked. He looked back down at the paper. His breathing shifted. "This is not a misunderstanding over a party," I continued, letting the facts hang in the air. "This is literal fraud. My mother committed a felony to steal $8,000 from me. I'm going to call the bank, flag the transfer as unauthorized, and then I am calling the police." I waited for him to nod. I waited for him to pull out his phone and stand by my side. This was Liam's final test. Instead, Liam dropped the piece of paper onto my desk like it was burning his fingers. He took a step back, running both hands through his hair. He began pacing the short distance between my bookshelf and the window. "Ruby, you cannot call the police," Liam said. His voice was a tight, panicked whisper. "You are not thinking about the optics here." "The optics," I repeated. "Yes, the optics," Liam hissed, stepping closer to keep his voice down. "Think about what you are saying. You want to arrest your own mother. You want to drag your family through a criminal investigation 8 months before our wedding." "There is no wedding, Liam. The venue is gone." "We can book the country club," he countered quickly, his hands gesturing in the air. "We can still host the reception. Do you have any idea who is on my guest list? I invited 3 senior partners from my consulting firm. I invited clients who manage 9-figure portfolios. If my future wife's family is embroiled in a wire fraud scandal, it will reflect directly on my judgment. It will ruin my reputation." I stood motionless, absorbing the reality of the man standing in front of me. He was not looking at a victim of theft. He was looking at a public relations crisis. "My parents stole my money," I said. "It is $8,000, Ruby. I will write you a check right now to replace it," Liam said, pulling his wallet out of his back pocket. "We will just say the money was a gift to Jackson. We will reframe the narrative. You want to reward a felony. I want to protect my career." Liam fired back, his corporate mask finally slipping. "Look, Jackson has momentum right now. He is talking to real investors. His fraternity brothers have connections to venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. If I play this right, I can leverage his network to land a consulting contract for my own firm. I cannot do that if you send his mother to prison." The silence that followed his confession was the loudest sound I had ever heard. He had just laid out his entire internal calculus. Liam did not care about the money, and he certainly did not care about my dignity. He cared about his path to becoming a senior partner. He cared about using Jackson's fake tech startup as a networking opportunity. He was willing to let my family walk all over me, provided they did it quietly enough not to disturb his high society guests. For 3 years, I thought Liam was my partner. I thought his polished exterior and calculated maneuvers were tools he used to protect us. I realized in that small home office that I was just another asset in his portfolio, and he had just decided my self-respect was a depreciating asset he was willing to liquidate. He chose his networking over his fiancée. Liam stopped pacing. He looked at me, reading the stillness in my posture. He took a slow breath and adjusted the cuffs of his expensive shirt, trying to rebuild the corporate facade.
"Ruby, be reasonable,"
he said, his tone softening into that practiced, placating rhythm. "We have a good life. Do not detonate our future over your pride. Just let them have this win. We will downgrade the venue, keep the peace, and move forward." I looked at the forged document sitting on my desk. I looked at the man who wanted to sweep a felony under the rug to protect his cocktail hour invitations. I did not scream. I did not cry. Crying was a currency I no longer spent on these people. I felt a cold mechanical pivot click into place deep inside my chest. The medical auditor took over. If I caused a scene right now, they would circle the wagons. They would lock me out of their financial movements, and Liam would try to control the damage. I needed them comfortable. I needed them to believe they had won the war so they would not see the audit coming. I picked up the forged cancellation form, folded it neatly, and slid it into my desk drawer. "You are right," I said. My voice was smooth, even, and entirely hollow. Liam exhaled a heavy sigh of relief. He stepped forward and placed his hands on my shoulders. "I knew you would see the logic. Let us go eat some noodles," I replied. "Let us not make a scene." 7 days passed. I spent those 168 hours executing a flawless routine of submission. If you want to catch a financial thief, you do not let them know they are being audited. You make them feel brilliant. You make them feel secure. I answered Patricia's daily phone calls with a soft, defeated tone. I cooked dinner for Liam and listened to him talk about his corporate networking strategy without interrupting his monologues. I became exactly what they all wanted me to be, the obedient, subdued workhorse who had accepted her place in the margins of her own life. By Friday morning, their defenses were down. They believed they had successfully navigated a minor rebellion. My mother called me during my lunch break. Her voice was practically vibrating with manufactured excitement. She told me she had solved our logistical problem. She had utilized Liam's membership connections to secure a replacement venue, and she insisted we meet there immediately to walk the space. Liam drove us to the country club in his pristine sedan. The property was a sprawling expanse of manicured greens and white pillars located just outside the city limits. It was the kind of establishment designed to make its members feel important by keeping outsiders beyond a wrought iron gate. When we walked through the double doors of the main clubhouse, the lobby smelled of lemon polish and generational wealth. I expected Patricia to lead us toward the grand ballroom with its crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the 18th hole. Instead, she walked right past the grand staircase. She led us down a narrow carpeted service corridor. We passed the kitchen prep area and the staff lockers. She stopped in front of a heavy wooden door marked lower-level event space. She pushed the door open and flipped a bank of plastic switches. The lights flickered to life. There were no chandeliers. There were no windows. It was a basement. Fluorescent light tubes buzzed overhead, casting a sickly pale wash over the rectangular room. The air was stale. smelling faintly of mildew and old catering warmer fuel. A loud heating and ventilation unit hummed aggressively in the corner, rattling the drop ceiling. The carpet beneath my feet bore dark circular stains from years of spilled wine and neglected maintenance. The ceiling tiles were a dingy nicotine yellow. "It is a blank canvas," Patricia announced. She gestured widely as if presenting a museum masterpiece. She stepped further into the gloomy room. "The event coordinator told me they usually use this space for overflow folding chair storage or Thursday morning Rotary Club meetings, but they had a cancellation for a Thursday afternoon next spring. We can book it for a fraction of the standard rate." A Thursday afternoon in a windowless basement. This was the physical manifestation of my place in the family hierarchy. They took my historic riverfront estate and replaced it with a storage closet. "And look at this," Patricia continued, walking over to a dusty folding table pushed against the far wall. "The club provides these plastic floral centerpieces at no extra charge. We will not even need to hire a florist. Think of the savings, Ruby." She held up a cheap fake hydrangea arrangement. It was covered in a thin layer of dust. I looked at Liam. The man who had worn a tailored suit to impress my parents just days ago was nodding along with eager approval. "Your mother is a genius, Ruby," Liam said. He crossed his arms and scanned the fluorescent ceiling like he was evaluating prime real estate. "This is incredible budget-friendly ingenuity. We can host the reception here, keep the expenses minimal, and I can still invite the senior partners. The country club address on the invitation is the only thing the partners will care about anyway. They will see the gold foil lettering on the envelope and assume the best. It is a perfect compromise." They stood there waiting for my reaction. They were asking me to sign off on my own degradation. They wanted me to smile while they seated me next to the trash can. I looked at the stained carpet. I looked at the plastic flowers in my mother's hand. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and forced a practiced, hollow smile onto my face. "It is very practical," I said quietly. "A Thursday afternoon works perfectly. Thank you for setting this up, Mom." Patricia beamed. Liam exhaled a deep breath, clapping his hands together. The tension in the room vanished. They had won. I had bent the knee. We left the country club an hour later. Liam dropped me off at my office building in Manhattan, kissing my cheek and telling me how proud he was of my maturity. I rode the elevator to the 15th floor, walked to my desk, and shut the door. The performance was over. It was time to work. My parents and Liam thought I was sulking over a canceled party. They forgot what I do for a living. I track money. Money never actually disappears. It leaves a digital trail, and I know exactly where to look for the footprints. Jackson's limited liability company was a registered entity in the state of New York. That meant his business operations were subject to public record laws. I booted up my dual monitors and logged into the state commercial database. I pulled the incorporation documents for his startup. I found his federal tax identification number. From there, I ran a uniform commercial code search. Lenders and creditors file these public notices whenever they secure an asset against a business entity. If Jackson had used my $8,000 to hire a patent lawyer or secure software developers, there would be no immediate public filing. Software code is not a physical asset. But if he used the capital injection to secure a tangible piece of property, a creditor would lock down the lien on the public ledger to protect their investment. Fake tech founders love to purchase assets under their corporate entities to write off the taxes. I pressed the Enter key and waited for the database query to return the results. 2 seconds later, a fresh filing populated on my screen. It was a lease agreement executed just 4 days ago. The creditor was a high-end automotive financing corporation. The debtor was Jackson's limited liability company. I clicked the document link. The digital contract materialized in front of me. I scrolled down to the itemized asset description. It was not a server rack. It was not office equipment. It was a vehicle. Specifically, it was a 2025 Porsche 911 Carrera. Slate gray exterior, custom leather interior. My eyes dropped to the financial summary block at the bottom of the page. The monthly lease payments were astronomical, stretched out over a 60-month term. But that was not the number that froze the blood in my veins. I looked at the line item labeled capitalized cost reduction. In layman terms, this is the cash down payment required to drive the luxury vehicle off the dealership lot. The amount listed was exactly $8,000 down to the very last cent. Jackson did not steal my wedding venue to fund a tech startup. He stole it to lease a German sports car. My mother forged a legal document and committed wire fraud so her golden boy could toss the keys to a Porsche on a restaurant table and pretend he was a visionary. I leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair. The glow of the monitors illuminated the quiet office. My hands were perfectly steady. The trap was no longer a vague idea. It was a necessity. I reached for my phone. It was time to take a train upstate. The rhythmic clack of the train against the steel tracks offered a steady metronome for my thoughts. I watched the dense concrete grid of Manhattan dissolve into the sprawling tree-lined estates of Westchester County. The transition of the landscape mirrored the shift in my own mind. I was leaving the noise and the manipulation behind. I had a manila folder resting on my lap. Inside were the printed public records detailing the lease of a 2025 Porsche Carrera alongside the forged venue cancellation form. I did not feel anxious. The adrenaline of the initial discovery had burned off, leaving behind a cold structural focus. The taxi dropped me off at the end of a long, crushed stone driveway. Evelyn lived in a classic colonial home that did not scream for attention. It sat far back from the road, insulated by ancient oak trees and manicured hedges. It was the physical embodiment of old money, the kind of wealth that does not need a slate gray sports car to prove it exists. The heavy wooden front door unlocked with a solid, satisfying thud. The house was quiet, smelling faintly of lemon wax and wood smoke. I found my grandmother in her study. The room was a sanctuary of deep, rich tones. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves lined the walls filled with hardback historical biographies, leather-bound ledgers, and pristine financial volumes. A brass lamp cast a warm glow over a heavy walnut desk. Evelyn was sitting behind the desk, reviewing a stack of property tax assessments with a gold pen in her hand. She wore a tailored cashmere sweater, looking every bit the matriarch my parents pretended she was not. She looked up over the rim of her reading glasses as I walked into the room. "You found the money," she stated. It was an observation, not a question. She set her gold pen down. I dropped my weekender bag onto the Persian rug. I walked over to the walnut desk and opened the manila folder. I spread the documents across the polished surface like a prosecutor laying out a timeline for a grand jury. I started with the cancellation form. I pointed to the forged signature near the bottom margin. Then I placed the bank routing confirmation right next to it, showing the deliberate detour through the dormant joint checking account. Finally, I set the uniform commercial code filing on top of the pile. The 60-month lease agreement for the luxury vehicle secured with an $8,000 capitalized cost reduction. Evelyn did not blink. She did not express outrage or ask unnecessary questions. She leaned forward and picked up the automotive lease. She traced the printed numbers with her index finger, reading the exact down payment amount. The silence in the mahogany study stretched for a long minute. Evelyn stood up. She walked over to a crystal decanter resting on a side table. She poured 2 fingers of amber bourbon into 2 heavy glass tumblers. She handed one to me and returned to her leather chair. Patricia has always been a remarkably cheap criminal, Evelyn said. She took a slow sip of her drink. The ice clinked against the crystal. She opened the bottom drawer of her desk. She pulled out a thick leather-bound ledger. It looked like an antique accounting book, but the pages were filled with her precise, slanted handwriting. My parents thought Evelyn was a passive observer. They thought she spent her retirement pruning hydrangeas and writing holiday checks. They did not understand that Evelyn tracked her family the same way I tracked medical billing fraud. Every bad investment, every bailed-out debt, every fabricated success story was documented in blue ink. She opened the ledger and flipped to a section dated nearly 3 decades ago. This is not the first time David and Patricia have prioritized vanity over stability, Evelyn explained. She tapped a column of numbers on the yellowed paper. When you were 6 years old, your father remortgaged your childhood home to buy into a failing restaurant franchise. He told me it was a guaranteed return on investment. 6 months later, the restaurant went under. They were 90 days away from foreclosure. I quietly bought the banknote to keep a roof over your head. I have carried their financial incompetence for 30 years to protect you and your brother. I let them play their games because I thought David would eventually grow out of his delusions. But Jackson's business is the most expensive illusion they have ever funded, she continued. I lowered my bourbon glass. Mom and Dad have been paying Jackson's rent in Manhattan for 2 years, I said. They told me the tech incubator space in Soho costs them $4,000 a month. Evelyn let out a short, humorless breath. The tech incubator space, she repeated. Ruby, your brother does not pay rent. Your parents do not pay his rent. I own that commercial building on Spring Street. I bought it in 1978. Jackson has been occupying the 3rd-floor suite for 24 months on a handshake agreement simply because David begged me to give the boy a chance to build his software. The pieces locked into place with a sickening snap. The layers of the American socioeconomic facade were thick and suffocating. My parents were pretending to be wealthy angel investors. Jackson was pretending to be a brilliant founder. Liam was pretending to marry into a lucrative network. Every single one of them was standing on the financial foundation built by the 78-year-old widow sitting across from me. They had constructed a massive house of cards using my stolen wedding deposit and Evelyn's real estate, and they expected me to clean up the mess when it inevitably collapsed. Evelyn closed the leather ledger. The heavy thud echoed in the quiet room. She folded her hands over the cover and looked directly into my eyes. She did not look at me like a grandmother looking at a wounded child. She looked at me like a senior partner assessing a junior associate. We have reached the bottom of the balance sheet, Evelyn said. The numbers no longer add up. You have a choice to make, Ruby. I can make a phone call to David tonight. I can demand he return your $8,000 and I can force him to discipline his son. That will fix the immediate theft. It will keep the peace. And you can go back to your country club basement and marry a man who values his cocktail hour more than your dignity. She leaned closer across the walnut desk. Or we can dismantle the illusion. Do you want to fix this or do you want to finish it? I thought about the cheap polyester centerpieces my mother had presented to me with a beaming smile. I thought about Liam telling me to sweep a felony under the rug to protect his corporate reputation. I thought about Jackson drinking my vintage wine while bragging about his fake investors. The people who were supposed to protect me had spent my entire life pushing me to the margins. I took a sip of the bourbon. It burned on the way down a sharp, clean heat that cleared the last remaining doubts from my mind. I want to finish it, I said. I want them to pay the actual price of admission. Evelyn offered a slow, approving nod. A genuine smile touched the corners of her mouth. Good girl, she whispered. We spent the next 2 hours drafting the architecture of their ruin. We did not yell. We did not scheme with malice. We functioned like an executive board liquidating a toxic asset. We reviewed the guest list for the upcoming rehearsal dinner. We mapped the social connections Liam was so desperate to protect. We needed to cut off the supply lines before we triggered the explosion. Jackson's entire identity was tied to the Soho office space. If that space vanished, his fraternity brother investors would scatter and the Porsche lease would default. Evelyn reached for the solid brass telephone resting on the corner of her desk. She dialed a Manhattan area code. A sharp voice answered on the other end. "Arthur," Evelyn said, her tone shifted into a cold corporate register. "I need you to draft a formal 3-day notice to quit for the third-floor suite on Spring Street. Classify the current occupant as a month-to-month holdover tenant. Terminate the agreement immediately." I sat in the mahogany study listening to my grandmother deploy her ruthless estate attorney. The rehearsal dinner was exactly 3 weeks away. My family thought they were preparing for a wedding. They did not realize they were preparing for an audit. 2 days after I sat in my grandmother's mahogany study, the theater continued. Liam's parents hosted our official engagement dinner at a renowned steakhouse in Tribeca. The restaurant was a fortress of dark wood brass fixtures and dry-aged beef. It catered exclusively to the corporate elite of New York. Liam's parents, Victoria and Richard, belonged to that world. They expected flawless execution in all social matters. They had no idea the prestigious wedding they were gathered to celebrate had been secretly dismantled and pawned off for a German sports car. Liam and I arrived early. We waited in the private dining room on the second floor. The space featured a large picture window overlooking the cobblestone street and the valet stand. I stood by the glass holding a glass of sparkling water, watching the street below. David and Patricia arrived first. They stepped out of a standard rideshare vehicle. They wore their finest clothes, their postures rigid with the effort of projecting a status they did not possess. A few moments later, a low, guttural engine roar echoed off the brick buildings. A slate gray 2025 Porsche Carrera pulled up to the curb. Jackson stepped out of the driver's seat. He wore a tailored Italian sport coat. He did not hand his keys to the valet. He tossed them through the air, flashing a careless, arrogant smile as the attendant scrambled to catch them. I watched my brother use my stolen wedding fund to buy the deference of a restaurant worker. I watched my parents greet him on the sidewalk. They beamed with manufactured pride, looking at the luxury car as if it validated every terrible financial decision they had ever made. Then I looked at Liam. My fiancé stood right next to me, watching the exact same scene through the window. He knew that car was leased with forged money. He knew my mother committed a felony to put Jackson behind that steering wheel. But Liam did not look disgusted. His eyes tracked the sleek lines of the sports car with genuine admiration. He was already calculating how a brother-in-law with a Porsche could elevate his own social capital. He saw the theft as a networking opportunity. We sat down at a long candlelit table. Victoria and Richard occupied the head seats. They poured expensive Cabernet and commanded the room with practiced ease. They had invited 2 other couples, senior partners from Liam's consulting firm, to witness the blending of our families. Jackson sat across from the partners. He immediately ordered a rare vintage scotch and began speaking loudly about angel investors' burn rates and market disruption. He used tech industry buzzwords to mask the fact that his company produced nothing. The senior partners nodded politely, mistaking his confidence for competence. The waiters brought out towers of iced seafood and thick cuts of prime rib. For the first 20 minutes, the conversation flowed safely around golf courses and corporate mergers. Then Victoria raised her wine glass and tapped it with a silver fork. She smiled at the table. Her diamond necklace caught the dim light of the dining room. "I want to make a toast to Liam and Ruby," Victoria announced. "And I want to officially brag to our guests. These two managed to secure the historic Hudson Valley estate for their wedding next spring. Do you know how hard it is to get a date there? It is the premier venue on the East Coast. It shows impeccable taste and serious financial planning. Patricia froze. Her fork stopped halfway to her mouth. David looked down at his plate, suddenly fascinated by his asparagus. They had not prepared a strategy for Liam's parents. They assumed Liam had already managed the expectations of his own family behind closed doors. The silence at our end of the table grew heavy. I picked up my steak knife and sliced a small piece of beef. I chewed it slowly, watching the panic set into my mother's eyes. I waited to see who would break the silence first. Liam smoothly stepped into the void. He did not miss a beat. He offered his mother a warm, charismatic smile and reached for my hand. I let him take it, keeping my muscles perfectly relaxed.
Actually, Mother,
Liam said, his voice projecting the ideal blend of humility and authority. Ruby and I recently made a mutual decision to pivot our strategy. We canceled the estate. We are going to host the reception at my country club instead. Victoria lowered her glass. Her smile vanished, replaced by a sharp, calculating frown. The country club, she repeated. Why on earth would you downgrade from a premier estate to the club? The basement event space is the only room available this late in the season. Liam squeezed my hand. He looked at the senior partners sitting across from us, making sure he had their full attention.
It was an act of philanthropy, he explained. Ruby's brother Jackson is launching a highly anticipated tech startup. He is building revolutionary logistics software. He was at a critical juncture and needed a rapid capital injection to secure his developers. Ruby and I discussed it, and we decided family comes first. We donated the venue deposit to his corporate entity. It was a sacrifice, but watching Jackson arrive tonight in his new company vehicle proved it was the right investment. The senior partners murmured in approval. They raised their glasses to Jackson. My brother offered a humble, practiced wave, soaking up the stolen praise without a trace of guilt. Patricia and David exhaled in unison, their shoulders dropping as Liam rescued them from exposure. He had taken a messy criminal theft and repackaged it into a heartwarming story of corporate synergy and family sacrifice. He sanitized their greed and painted himself as the generous, understanding patriarch. Victoria looked at me. Her eyes were cold. She assessed my worth and found it severely lacking. She saw a woman from a lesser family who dragged her son down into financial mediocrity. She saw a bride who forced her wealthy fiancé to host his wedding in a dark basement to subsidize a failing relative. Well, Victoria said, her voice dripping with refined condescension, it is nice that Liam is so financially accommodating of your family and their needs. I suppose we must all make sacrifices for those less fortunate. I did not correct her. I did not pull my hand away from Liam. I sat at a table surrounded by people eating steaks that cost more than my first car, listening to them applaud a thief. Liam was smiling, practically glowing under the approval of his bosses. He had successfully leveraged my humiliation to boost his own corporate networking score. I picked up my wine glass and took a slow sip. The red wine tasted like ash. I realized then that I was not just dismantling my parents and my brother. I was going to burn Liam's entire world to the ground right alongside them. I waited for the waiter to clear the main courses and pour the coffee. Then I politely excused myself from the table. I walked across the dining room, my heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. I pushed open the heavy oak door to the women's restroom. The room was empty. It was lined with dark marble and gold fixtures. I walked over to the mirror and placed my hands on the cold stone counter. I looked at my reflection. My posture was straight. My dress was elegant. But deep in my chest, a final chord snapped. For 29 years, I had bent over backwards to be the understanding daughter, the supportive sister, the accommodating partner.
I had accepted the scraps they threw me and called it love. A single tear broke loose, sliding down my cheek. I watched it fall in the mirror. I reached up and wiped it away, ensuring it left no trace. I took a deep breath, inhaling the cold air of the marble room. That was the last tear I would ever shed over these people. The audit was over. The collection was about to begin. I returned to the private dining room that night, took my seat next to Liam, and smiled. It was the easiest smile I had ever faked because it was no longer a negotiation. It was a countdown. Over the next 3 weeks, I went to work. I did not raise my voice in the apartment. I did not argue when Liam spent his evenings strategizing how to introduce Jackson to his managing director. I became a ghost in my own life, executing a masterclass in silent detachment. If you want to disappear, you cannot just walk out the front door. A sudden departure leaves messy loose ends, and loose ends can be tracked. I started with the financial infrastructure. I logged into my corporate payroll portal from a secure terminal at my office. I redirected my direct deposits from the joint checking account I shared with Liam to a secure independent credit union. I waited until Liam was at the gym to call the credit card companies. I systematically removed myself as an authorized user on every shared line of credit. I froze my own credit file immediately afterward to prevent any new inquiries. I severed the digital ties with clinical precision. Then came the physical apartment lease. The rental contract was in both our names, and breaking it unilaterally usually triggers an automated email notification to all parties. I bypassed the digital system entirely. I took the subway to the property management office in Long Island City. The office smelled of old coffee and toner fluid. I sat across from the property manager, a tired woman eating a salad at her desk, and handed her a cashier check for the $3,000 early termination penalty. I signed the addendum removing my name from the lease post, dating the effect to the morning after our scheduled rehearsal dinner. She stamped the paperwork, asked 0 questions, and handed me my carbon copy. I was legally untethered from the man I was supposed to marry. Next was the physical extraction. I owned valuable items. Heirloom jewelry from my late grandfather, high-end auditing software on physical external drives, rare vintage accessories I bought during successful financial quarters. I could not pack a moving truck without sounding an alarm. Instead, I brought home 3 large cardboard boxes and a roll of clear packing tape. I wrote the word donations on the side of each box in thick black marker. While Liam watched a sports broadcast in the living room, I packed my most valuable possessions under layers of old sweaters and discarded college textbooks. I taped the boxes shut and carried them down to the lobby right in front of him. He did not even look up from his screen. He was too busy scrolling through his professional networking feed to notice his fiancée smuggling her life out the door. I drove the boxes across the river to Brooklyn. My friend Harper was a forensic accountant I met during my first corporate audit. She lived in a spacious sunlit loft in Williamsburg and understood the necessity of a clean exit. She gave me a spare key and cleared out half her guest closet. She did not ask for a detailed explanation. Forensic accountants never do. They just look at the trajectory of the wreckage and offer a safe harbor. While I was silently dismantling my life, Patricia was busy accelerating her demands. Believing she had achieved total submission, my mother lost whatever remaining filter she possessed. My phone buzzed constantly with new directives. Her demands were no longer masked as maternal advice. They were orders from a manager to a subordinate. The first demand arrived via a long text message on a Tuesday morning. Patricia informed me that since we were downgrading the venue to the country club basement, we needed to save money on the paper goods. She told me to buy blank cardstock and handwrite all 150 invitations. She reasoned that my handwriting was elegant enough and the printing costs were better allocated to Jackson. I was sitting at my office desk when the message came through. I did not call her to argue. I typed a simple response. Yes, Mom. I will write them by hand. 3 days later, Patricia escalated again. 3 days. This time it was the wedding dress. She sent me a link to a discount thrift store in Queens. She suggested I purchase a second-hand gown and alter it myself using a sewing machine. The justification was typed out in stark black and white. Jackson had decided to throw a launch party for his app the weekend after my wedding, and he needed premium catering to impress his fraternity brothers. My mother explicitly stated that spending money on a new wedding dress was frivolous when Jackson needed an upscale sushi spread for his investors. I stared at the message. It was a breathtaking display of entitlement documented forever on a digital server. I took a screenshot. I backed it up to a secure cloud folder. Then I replied, I understand, Mom. I will go to the thrift store tomorrow. Every time she demanded a sacrifice, I complied via text. I was not being a pushover. I was building a flawless paper trail. I was gathering the receipts of their greed, securing concrete proof of the exact dynamic they would later try to deny. I wanted their exploitation recorded in their own words. Liam saw me handwriting the invitations at the kitchen island until 2 o'clock in the morning. His hand cramped. Just watching me, he joked, pouring himself a glass of water. He knew I was exhausted from working 50-hour weeks at the auditing firm. He knew my mother was squeezing me dry to subsidize a luxury lifestyle for my brother, but Liam just patted my shoulder and told me I was being a great team player. He told me the senior partners would be impressed by my dedication to budget management. He turned off the kitchen light and went to sleep, leaving me in the dark with a stack of cheap cardstock and a fading pen. The silent untangling took exactly 21 days. The tension in my chest grew tight, a coiled spring waiting for the release mechanism. I walked a tightrope, playing the beautiful daughter and the compliant partner, knowing one wrong step would trigger their defensive protocols. On the morning of the 22nd day, I sat in my cubicle at the auditing firm. The internal mail cart rolled down the aisle, the wheels squeaking against the thin carpet. The mailroom clerk stopped at my desk and handed me a heavy, rigid cardboard envelope. It bore a red overnight shipping label. I looked at the return address. It was from Arthur's midtown law firm, Evelyn's ruthless estate attorney. I waited until the aisle was empty before pulling the tab on the envelope. The thick cardboard tore with a sharp, satisfying rip. Inside was a dense stack of formal legal documents printed on heavy stock paper. I fanned the pages out across my desk. The 3-day eviction notice for the Soho office suite, the formal trust restructuring documents, the financial excommunications, every signature was notarized. Every legal loophole was sealed shut. The trap was fully constructed. The paper trail was secured. The stage was set for the rehearsal dinner. The legal documents from Arthur sat securely in my locked desk drawer. The foundation of the trap was poured, but the surface-level performance had to continue without a single crack. The illusion of my submission needed to remain flawless until the very last second. That Saturday, my mother scheduled my dress fitting. Patricia did not book an appointment at the elegant bridal salons in Manhattan we had discussed 6 months ago. She drove us to a warehouse outlet in a sprawling strip mall deep in Queens. The store was called Bridal Liquidators. The air inside smelled of old floor wax and cheap plastic garment bags. Fluorescent overhead lights hummed with an irritating vibration, casting a harsh, uncomplimentary glare over hundreds of densely packed metal racks. Women were pushing past each other, pulling heavy hangers across steel bars with a loud grating friction. It was a factory designed for volume, not celebration. Patricia led me to the back of the store. She pulled a gown from the clearance rack and handed it to the exhausted sales clerk. 10 minutes later, I stepped out of the cramped dressing cubicle and climbed onto a scuffed wooden pedestal in front of a 3-way mirror. I looked at my reflection. The dress was a rigid, synthetic nightmare. The polyester lace scratched at my collarbone, leaving a faint red rash against my skin. The bodice was stiff, reinforced with cheap plastic boning that dug sharply into my ribs every time I took a breath. It did not drape. It hung off my frame like a piece of industrial upholstery. Patricia stood at the base of the pedestal. She did not look at how the dress fit me. She was looking at the white cardboard tag dangling from the sleeve. $200! Patricia sighed, shaking her head. She tapped the price tag with her manicured fingernail. It is a bit steep for a Thursday afternoon basement reception, Ruby. I was hoping we could find something closer to $100. You are only going to wear it for a few hours. I stared at her through the mirror. My mother was actively trying to negotiate my worth down to a double-digit price tag. We need to be mindful of the family budget right now. Patricia continued, smoothing her own expensive cashmere cardigan. Jackson had his final fitting this morning. He found a wonderful tailor on the Upper East Side. I kept my voice neutral. How much was his suit? Yeah! $3,000, Patricia said, beaming with unbothered pride. It is a custom Italian wool blend, but you have to understand the context, Ruby. He is throwing his application launch party the weekend after your wedding. He will be taking photographs with venture capitalists. He is the face of the company. He has to look like a chief executive officer. You want your brother to succeed, do you not? I stood on the scuffed wooden block, suffocating in an itchy $200 polyester cage. This was the ultimate physical manifestation of my family hierarchy. My mother was willing to drop $3,000 of stolen money to dress a fraud in Italian wool, but she resented spending a fraction of that to clothe her own daughter. I was the donor class. Jackson was the beneficiary. Before I could formulate a response, my phone vibrated on the small chair next to the mirror. Patricia picked it up and glanced at the screen. It is Liam, she said, handing the device up to me. I unlocked the screen and read the text message from my fiancé. Hey, Liam wrote, can you swing by the dry cleaners on your way home and pick up my charcoal suits? I am grabbing drinks with Jackson and his lead developer. Networking never sleeps. I read the words twice. Liam knew I was standing in a bridal shop enduring my mother trying to find a dress for a wedding he refused to defend. He did not ask how the fitting was going. He did not offer to pay for the gown. He treated me like a personal assistant running errands while he pursued his networking agenda with my brother. He was out drinking with Jackson, the same brother who stole my money. The same brother whose lead developer did not actually exist. I locked the phone screen. The air in the bridal warehouse suddenly felt incredibly thin. Ruby, Patricia prompted, tapping her foot against the linoleum floor. What do you think? Should we keep looking on the discount rack? I stepped down from the wooden pedestal. I did not ask the sales clerk to help me unzip the gown. I reached behind my back, gripped the cheap metal zipper, and pulled it down with a swift, decisive motion. The sound was like tearing cardboard. I need a moment to think about the budget, I said to my mother. I walked back into the dressing cubicle, stepped out of the scratchy fabric, and put my own clothes back on. I left the polyester dress in a heap on the floor. I walked out of the store, leaving Patricia standing near the clearance racks with a confused look on her face. I did not go to the dry cleaners. I got into my car, merged onto the highway, and drove straight into Manhattan. I parked in Soho, 2 blocks away from the fake tech incubator office my grandmother was currently repossessing. I walked into a high-end bridal salon I had bookmarked on my computer nearly a year ago. The atmosphere was the exact inverse of the warehouse in Queens. The salon was quiet, smelling of vanilla and fresh lilies. Natural sunlight poured through arched windows, illuminating a curated selection of pristine garments. A consultant offered me a glass of champagne. I declined. I pointed to a specific gown displayed on a velvet mannequin near the center of the room. "I want to try that one on," I told her. 10 minutes later, I stood in front of a flawless gilded mirror. The dress was pure heavy silk. It draped beautifully, falling over my shoulders and pooling at my feet like liquid silver. There was no scratching lace. There was no cheap plastic boning. It felt powerful. It felt like armor. The consultant adjusted the train and smiled. "It is stunning on you," she said softly. "How much is it?" I asked. She checked the ledger. $4,500. I did not flinch. I did not ask for a discount. I reached into my purse, pulled out the debit card linked to my newly secured independent credit union account, and handed it to her. "I will take it," I said. "I am taking it home today." I paid in full. I waited for the transaction to clear, taking a profound, quiet pleasure in spending my own hard-earned money on myself. The consultant wrapped the silk gown in acid-free tissue paper and placed it inside a thick, opaque garment bag. She handed me the receipt. I folded the slip of paper and tucked it safely into my wallet. I drove across the bridge into Brooklyn. I used my spare key to enter Harper's sunlit loft. I carried the heavy garment bag into the spare room, hung it on the custom rack, and unzipped the front just enough to see the white silk catching the afternoon light. I was never going to wear this dress down an aisle toward Liam. I was going to hang it in my new apartment as a permanent reminder of the day I stopped accepting cheap substitutes for love. I left the loft and drove to the main post office in Lower Manhattan. It was time to initiate the final sequence. The formal invitations for the rehearsal dinner were sitting in the passenger seat of my car. I had spent 2 nights handwriting the addresses on thick cardstock exactly as Patricia demanded. Liam had reviewed the guest list. Patricia had checked the postage. They believed they controlled every single person entering that banquet hall. They were wrong. I carried the heavy stack of envelopes to the blue postal collection box on the corner. Before I opened the metal chute, I reached into my trench coat pocket and pulled out 3 extra envelopes. I had written these 3 addresses in the quiet solitude of my office, far away from Liam's watchful eyes. The first envelope was addressed to the regional managing director of the Automotive Finance Corporation that held the lease on Jackson's slate gray Porsche. The second envelope was addressed to the senior managing partner of Liam's corporate consulting firm. This was the man who evaluated Liam's promotion prospects, a man known throughout the industry for despising public scandals and financial impropriety. The third envelope was addressed to the primary investor. Jackson had been boasting about the wealthy father of one of Jackson's fraternity brothers, who believed his son was funding a legitimate logistics empire in a Soho office suite. I shuffled the 3 extra envelopes into the center of the stack. I pulled open the heavy metal handle of the collection box and dropped the entire batch down the dark chute. The invitations were mailed. The audience was locked in. The countdown to the dinner had officially begun. 7 days before the scheduled rehearsal dinner, Evelyn executed the first offensive strike. Jackson arrived at the Spring Street Commercial Building on a Tuesday morning. He parked his leased Porsche down the block, taking care to position the vehicle where passing pedestrians could admire the slate gray paint. He walked up the concrete stairs to the 3rd-floor suite, holding a high-end coffee. When he reached the heavy glass entrance to his incubator space, his magnetic key card did not work. He swiped the plastic card against the reader 3 times. The security light flashed red instead of green. He pushed against the glass. A heavy brass padlock secured the double doors from the inside. Taped to the center of the glass was a thick packet of legal documents. It was a formal 3-day notice to quit. Arthur Evelyn's estate attorney had drafted the paperwork with lethal precision, because Jackson never signed a formal commercial lease.
Relying entirely on David's verbal arrangement with Evelyn, the law classified Jackson as a month-to-month holdover tenant. Evelyn had officially terminated that grace period. The legal text stated that if Jackson or his associates attempted to enter the premises, local law enforcement would be dispatched to arrest them for trespassing. Jackson stood in the hallway, his coffee growing cold in his hand. He stared at the legal seal of the state of New York stamped near the bottom of the page. The physical anchor of his entire identity was gone. He had no conference room, no whiteboards, no illusion of corporate momentum. He was locked out of his own stage. The panic set in immediately. Jackson pulled out his phone and dialed David. My father was sitting in his suburban living room reading the morning financial news when he received the frantic call. Patricia took the phone from her husband. Her voice rose in octaves as Jackson explained the padlock on the glass doors and the legal threat taped to the window. My parents could not comprehend the boundary. They had spent decades treating Evelyn's assets as their own personal safety net. They assumed the Soho office was a permanent birthright. They tried to call Evelyn. They called her landline her mobile phone and the emergency contact number at her local country club. Upstate Evelyn sat on her cedar porch wrapped in a thick wool shawl. A pot of Earl Grey tea steamed on the wicker table next to her. Her smartphone vibrated across the glass tabletop, illuminating with Patricia's name over and over again. Evelyn did not answer. She picked up her porcelain teacup, took a slow sip, and watched a bluebird land on her wooden feeder. She let the phone ring until the battery died. She was cutting off their oxygen supply, and she felt zero obligation to explain her methods. Down in Manhattan, Jackson was rapidly losing control of his narrative. His primary investors were 3 former fraternity brothers. These were young men who funded their Manhattan lifestyles using their parents' wealth. They did not actually care about the logistics software Jackson claimed to be developing. They cared about having a trendy headquarters in Soho where they could bring dates, drink expensive scotch, and pretend to be influential venture capitalists. When the fraternity brothers arrived at the building that afternoon, they found the locked doors and the eviction notice. They started texting Jackson in a rapid, relentless wave. They demanded an explanation. They demanded to see the proprietary application prototype Jackson had been promising for 6 months. They wanted to know why a landlord was threatening them with police action. Jackson knew his situation was critical. If he admitted he had been evicted by his own grandmother, the fraternity brothers would realize he was a fraud. They would pull their funding. If the funding vanished, the Porsche lease would default and his entire social standing would evaporate. The house of cards was swaying in the wind. Jackson needed a new office space and he needed it before the end of the week. He required cash to secure a commercial deposit, and his own parents were already tapped out from funding his tailored suits. He had one remaining lifeline. Jackson drove to the financial district. He waited outside Liam's corporate consulting firm until Liam walked out for his lunch hour. Jackson cornered my fiancé near a high-end sandwich shop. I was not there to witness the conversation, but I audited the financial wreckage later, piecing together the exact sequence of events. Jackson pitched a desperate, fabricated narrative. He told Liam the Soho building had suffered a catastrophic plumbing failure, claiming his developers were temporarily displaced due to water damage. He said he found a brilliant new warehouse space in Brooklyn that was perfect for his growing team, but the new landlord required an immediate cash deposit. Jackson asked Liam for a $10,000 bridge loan. He promised to repay the money with interest the moment his next round of seed funding cleared. Liam stood on the sidewalk holding his overpriced lunch. A prudent consultant would have asked to see the plumbing damage. A competent professional would have requested a balance sheet. But Liam was blinded by his own corporate ambition. He wanted to secure a favor from the man he believed was the next big technology founder. He wanted Jackson owing him a debt. He envisioned Jackson introducing him to Silicon Valley billionaires. Liam prioritized his networking goals over basic financial common sense. He agreed to provide the bridge loan. That evening, Liam returned to our apartment in Astoria. I was sitting at the kitchen island drinking a glass of water, reviewing a stack of medical billing files. Liam walked through the front door, took off his suit jacket, and offered me a warm, practiced smile. He opened his laptop and placed it on the granite counter next to my files. He casually mentioned that he was moving some funds around to help Jackson secure a temporary workspace. He framed the loan as a strategic investment in our future family network. He told me it was a small price to pay to keep Jackson's momentum moving forward. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or point out the absurdity of giving my brother more money. I nodded, took a slow sip of my water, and watched him type his password into the banking portal. Liam navigated to the joint savings account we had opened 2 years prior. This was the account where we pooled our excess income for major life purchases, like a down payment on a house or a wedding venue. It was the account I had methodically drained and closed during my silent untangling phase. Liam clicked the icon to initiate a $10,000 wire transfer. The web page loaded. Liam stopped typing. His hand hovered over the trackpad. He leaned closer to the screen, his brow furrowing in confusion. He clicked the refresh button on his browser. He rubbed his eyes and refreshed the page a third time. The account was not just empty, it was permanently closed. The balance displayed on the high-definition screen in bold black font was $0. Liam stared at the glowing screen. His reflection in the monitor showed a man whose corporate composure was rapidly dissolving. He tapped the trackpad again. He refreshed the browser. The numbers did not change. 0 and 0. "Ruby!" Liam called out. His voice was higher than usual. It lacked the smooth baritone he utilized in boardrooms. "Ruby, come here for a second. Something is wrong with the bank portal." I set my medical billing files down on the granite counter. I walked over to where he was standing. I looked at the screen over his shoulder. I let a perfectly calibrated expression of confusion wash over my face. "Where did the funds go?" I asked. My tone was laced with mild concern. "I do not know," Liam stammered. He ran a hand through his hair. "I logged in to initiate the wire for Jackson, and the account was empty. Did you pay a large vendor bill for the wedding?" I shook my head. "No, the only thing I paid for recently was the grocery delivery. Let me look." I leaned over the keyboard. I clicked through the transaction history. I knew exactly what was there because I was the one who scrubbed it. The history showed a pending administrative hold. It was a standard protocol I triggered before closing the account. "It is a fraud alert lockdown," I said smoothly. I stepped back and crossed my arms. "We have never initiated a $10,000 wire transfer from this specific account before. The algorithm must have flagged the sudden movement as suspicious activity. They freeze the balance to 0 to protect the assets while it is under review by the clearinghouse." Liam let out a ragged breath. He rubbed his temples. "Are you sure about this? Jackson needs this deposit tomorrow morning to secure the Brooklyn warehouse. The landlord is threatening to give the space to another startup. If Jackson loses this office, his investors are going to pull their term sheets." I placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. I channeled the exact brand of placating energy he used on me when he told me to accept a basement wedding. "It is just a banking error," I told him softly. "I deal with financial holds every day at the auditing firm. I will go to the physical branch tomorrow morning before work. I will show them my identification, clear the fraud alert, and initiate the wire to Jackson directly from the teller window. It will be fine."
Liam exhaled a long breath. His shoulders dropped. He was a consultant who analyzed risk for a living, but his desperation to impress a fake tech founder overrode his basic logic. He wanted to believe the lie because the alternative meant facing the reality of his own poor judgment.
"Thank you,"
Liam said, pulling out his phone to text my brother. "Tell Jackson the funds will clear by noon tomorrow. He just needs to stall the landlord." I smiled at him. "I will take care of everything tomorrow. I promised." Tomorrow was Thursday, the day of the rehearsal dinner. The event was scheduled for 6 o'clock in the evening. I arrived at the country club at 5. I wore a tailored black sheath dress. It was elegant, understated, and offered zero distractions. I walked down the narrow service corridor toward the lower-level event space. When I pushed the heavy wooden doors open, I stopped in my tracks. The dreary, windowless basement had been transformed. Patricia had hired an elite event production team. The stained carpets were covered by a pristine white vinyl dance floor. The drop ceiling was hidden beneath yards of draped chiffon, but the most glaring element was the flowers. There were thousands of them. Towering arrangements of white orchids, imported hydrangeas, and cascading roses occupied every single table. A towering floral arch framed the entrance. The room smelled like a botanical garden. I did the mental math. I knew the wholesale cost of imported orchids. Patricia had spent at least $9,000 on the floral arrangements alone. This was the same woman who told me an $8,000 venue deposit was a frivolous waste of capital. She claimed we had no money for my wedding, but she easily secured $9,000 to impress Liam's parents for a single dinner. Patricia spotted me near the entrance. She rushed over holding a glass of champagne. She wore a designer silk dress and a heavy pearl necklace. "Ruby, darling!" Patricia beamed, gesturing to the room. "Does it not look magnificent? I told you we could make this space work. First impressions matter so much, and Victoria is accustomed to a certain standard. We could not let Liam down." "You did an incredible job, Mom," I said. My voice betrayed no emotion. "The flowers are stunning." She patted my cheek entirely, oblivious to the cold precision behind my eyes. She fluttered away to direct a waiter holding a tray of crab cakes. Guests began arriving shortly after. Liam stood near the entrance, shaking hands and collecting social capital. His parents, Richard and Victoria, entered the room looking mildly impressed by the floral display. Then came the corporate executives. Liam pulled me towards a tall man with silver hair and a sharp suit. This was Gregory, the senior managing partner of the consulting firm, the man who held Liam's future in his hands.
"Gregory,"
Liam said, his voice dripping with sycophantic respect.
"I would like to introduce my fiancée, Ruby."
I extended my hand. "A pleasure to meet you, Gregory. Liam speaks of your leadership constantly." Gregory shook my hand firmly. He smiled, evaluating my composure. "A lovely event, Ruby. Liam tells me you work in medical auditing. That is a rigorous field." "It requires a certain attention to detail," I replied. "You have to follow the numbers no matter where they lead." Gregory nodded approvingly.
"I like that mindset. Liam is a rising star in our division, but a sharp partner at home is the real secret to corporate longevity. We expect great things from both of you."
I smiled back. "We are very excited for the future." I played the role perfectly. I was the supportive, articulate partner. I stood by Liam as he introduced me to 3 more corporate directors. I offered measured responses, laughed at their mild jokes, and sipped my sparkling water. Across the room, Jackson was holding court. He wore his custom Italian wool suit. He was speaking to Victoria and a few of Liam's colleagues. He held a glass of scotch, gesturing wildly as he talked about disrupting the supply chain sector. He was riding high on the promise of the $10,000 wire he believed I had sent that morning. The banquet manager chimed a small bell. It was time for everyone to take their seats for the formal speeches. The guests began moving toward their assigned tables. This was my window. I tapped Liam on the arm. "I need to visit the restroom before they serve the first course," I murmured.
"Go ahead and sit down. I will be right back."
Liam nodded, distracted by Gregory taking a seat at our table. I walked toward the exit, but I did not go to the restroom. I skirted the perimeter of the room, walking along the dark wall behind the draped chiffon. I navigated through the shadows until I found the audio-visual booth set up in the back corner. The booth was a small folding table covered in black linen. It held a sound mixing board, a laptop, and a wireless microphone receiver. Sitting behind the table was a teenage technician. He wore a rumpled black vest and a bored expression. He was staring down at his phone, scrolling through social media. I stepped up to the table. The boy looked up, startled by my sudden appearance. "Good evening," I said. My voice was very quiet. The technician blinked. "Hi. Do you need a microphone turned up?" I reached into my small clutch purse. I pulled out a black plastic universal serial bus drive. I set it down on the black linen right next to his mixing board. Then I reached into my purse a second time. I pulled out a crisp $100 bill. I placed it flat on the table, resting my index finger on Benjamin Franklin's face. I slid the bill and the drive toward the teenager. "I have a visual presentation for the speeches tonight," I told him. "It is a surprise for my family." The technician looked at the $100 bill. He swallowed hard. His eyes darted to the drive and then back to my face. He reached out and slid the money into his pocket.
"Okay,"
he said, plugging the drive into his laptop. The screen flashed as it read the files. "What do you need me to do?" I looked at the boy. I did not smile. My pulse was a slow, steady drumbeat. "I am going to walk up to the podium in about 5 minutes," I instructed. I am going to take the microphone. When I tap the mesh of the microphone exactly twice, you hit play on the first file. Do not stop the presentation until the screen goes black. Do you understand?" The boy nodded, his eyes wide. "Tap twice. Hit play. Got it." I turned away from the booth. I walked back into the bright floral-scented room. I took my seat next to Liam. The trap was armed. The trigger was in my hand. The banquet hall hummed with the sound of 150 guests. The white vinyl dance floor gleamed under the strategic uplighting Patricia had rented. I took my seat next to Liam at table 1. This table was the gravitational center of the room. It was a long rectangular slab of polished mahogany positioned directly in front of the small elevated stage. Seated to my left was Liam. To my right were Richard and Victoria. Directly across from us sat Gregory, the senior managing partner of the consulting firm, alongside his wife. Next to Gregory sat my parents, David and Patricia, and my brother, Jackson. I observed the room with the detached precision of a senior auditor reviewing a compromised ledger. I watched Patricia lean across the table to compliment Gregory on his recent acquisition in the financial sector. She was trying desperately to speak his language, hoping the $9,000 worth of imported orchids surrounding us would mask the fact that she was drowning in consumer debt. I glanced toward the back corner of the room. My grandmother Evelyn sat at table 8. She wore a simple charcoal silk dress. She was not trying to impress anyone. She slowly sipped a glass of sparkling water, her eyes tracking the movements at table 1 with the cold calculation of a predator waiting for the trap to spring. Waiters in crisp white jackets cleared the salad plates and poured the wine. The banquet manager stepped to the side of the room and chimed a small brass bell. The low hum of conversation faded into an expectant silence. It was time for the formal speeches. Richard stood up first. He picked up his crystal champagne flute and tapped it gently with a silver spoon. The sound cut clearly through the quiet basement. He buttoned his tailored suit jacket and smiled at the crowd.
"Welcome, everyone,"
Richard began. His voice was deep and resonant, trained by decades of delivering closing arguments and board presentations.
"Victoria and I are thrilled to host you tonight as we celebrate the blending of two successful families."
Richard raised his glass toward my parents. David puffed out his chest. Patricia offered a royal wave. They absorbed the validation like a sponge. "We have watched Liam build an impressive career." Richard continued, turning his gaze to my fiancé. "He is a man who understands strategy partnerships and the value of a solid investment. When he told us that he and Ruby were shifting their wedding plans to support a family business venture, we were initially surprised. But looking around this room, seeing the dedication to family enterprise, it makes perfect sense. It is a testament to the character of everyone sitting at this table." The guests offered a polite round of applause. Gregory nodded his approval from his seat. Liam squeezed my hand under the table. He leaned his shoulder into mine, projecting the image of a unified, deeply in love couple.
"Thank you, Richard,"
a voice called out. Jackson pushed his chair back and stood up. He walked around the long mahogany table and approached the elevated stage. He climbed the 2 wooden steps and stood behind the acrylic podium. He adjusted the microphone stand, gripping the edges of the podium with both hands. He wore his $3,000 custom Italian wool suit. The slate gray fabric draped perfectly over his shoulders, paid for entirely by my stolen money. Jackson surveyed the 150 guests. He deployed his most charismatic, humble smile.
"For those who do not know me, my name is Jackson Morris," he announced. "I am the brother of the bride, and I am the founder of a technology startup based here in New York." He paused, letting the title hang in the air for the corporate executives to digest. "Building a company from the ground up is not an easy journey." Jackson continued, his voice dripping with manufactured sincerity. "It requires sleepless nights. It requires a relentless pursuit of a vision that most people cannot see. But more than anything, it requires early believers. It requires seed investors who trust your potential before you even have a product on the market." He looked directly at Patricia and David. "Mom, Dad,"
Jackson said, placing a hand over his heart. "Thank you for always believing in my vision. Thank you for being my first and most important investors. You taught me what it means to build a legacy." Patricia pulled a lace handkerchief from her purse and dabbed at the corner of her eye. David beamed, looking around the table to ensure the senior partners were witnessing his son publicly validate their parenting. Then Jackson turned his gaze toward me.
"But tonight is about Ruby and Liam,"
Jackson said, his tone softening into a register of profound gratitude.
"Ruby, you are the best sister a guy could ever ask for.
When my company reached a critical juncture last month, I needed capital to secure my development team. Without hesitation, Ruby and Liam sacrificed their dream wedding venue. They donated their entire deposit so I could build my tech empire." Jackson looked out at the audience, shaking his head as if overwhelmed by the generosity.
"That is the ultimate act of sibling solidarity,"
Jackson declared.
"I promise you, Ruby, when my company goes public,
I am throwing you the biggest anniversary party this city has ever seen. To Ruby and Liam." Jackson raised his glass. The room erupted into applause. It was not polite clapping this time. It was enthusiastic, resonant applause. The corporate executives loved the narrative. They loved the synergy. They clapped for a man they believed was a rising Silicon Valley star. and they clapped for the quiet, supportive sister who knew her place in the background. I sat perfectly still. I did not smile. I did not touch my water glass. I watched my brother bathe in the stolen adoration. I watched my mother soak up the social capital she had purchased with my forged signature. Liam leaned over to me. He smelled of expensive scotch and cedar cologne. His face was flushed with the thrill of successful corporate maneuvering.
"See?"
Liam whispered directly into my ear, his breath warm against my neck.
"Is this not great for my networking? Gregory is eating this up. He just told my father that Jackson shows remarkable executive presence. This is going to fast-track my promotion to senior partner."
I turned my head very slowly. I looked
Liam directly in the eyes. I looked at the man who had traded my self-respect for a promotion. I looked at the coward who had asked me to hide a felony so he could climb the corporate ladder. My pulse was steady, a resting heart rate of 60 beats per minute. I placed my napkin on the table. I stood up. My chair scraped lightly against the white vinyl dance floor. The sound was faint, but the movement caught the attention of the room. The applause began to die down as the guests realized the bride was moving. I walked around the long mahogany table. I did not rush. My heels clicked a slow, methodical rhythm against the floor. Every eye in the room followed my path. 150 faces turned to watch me approach the stage. Jackson was still standing behind the acrylic podium. He held the microphone in his hand. He wore a wide, smug grin, assuming I was coming up to give him a hug to complete the public relations performance. I climbed the 2 wooden steps. I stopped right in front of him. I did not hug him. I did not smile. I reached out and took the microphone from his hand. Jackson blinked, surprised by the firm pull, but he let it go. He took a step back, giving me the floor, expecting me to offer a tearful speech about how proud I was to support his corporate dreams. I turned my back to my brother. I faced the 150 guests. I looked at Patricia and David, who were beaming at me from table 1. I looked at Liam, who was raising his glass toward me in a silent toast. I looked at Gregory, who was waiting for the obedient fiancé to speak. I gripped the cold metal handle of the microphone. I raised my free hand. I tapped the metal mesh of the microphone exactly twice. The sound of the 2 taps resonated through the audio system. The low-frequency thump caused the crystal glasses on the mahogany table to vibrate. At the back of the room, the 19-year-old technician followed my instructions. He pressed the space bar on his laptop. A motorized hum filled the basement. The high-definition projector mounted above the dance floor ignited. A brilliant, harsh beam of white light shot across the room, slicing through the dim ambiance and hitting the blank wall directly behind the stage. Jackson flinched. He shielded his eyes from the glare and turned around. Displayed on the wall, magnified to 10 feet tall, was the Hudson Valley estate cancellation form. Every paragraph of boilerplate text, every date, and every signature was illuminated for 150 guests to read. I looked out at the audience. The polite smiles had vanished. Gregory, the senior managing partner, narrowed his eyes at the screen, his corporate instincts trying to process the sudden shift in the agenda. Victoria and Richard exchanged a confused, worried glance. "Most of you were told a very inspiring story tonight," I said. My voice projected cleanly through the speakers. It was steady, clinical, and completely devoid of emotion. "You were told that I voluntarily sacrificed my dream wedding venue. You were told I donated an $8,000 deposit to my brother so he could build a technology empire." I paused, letting the silence stretch across the room. "That is a lie," I stated. A collective intake of breath swept through the guests.
Patricia went entirely rigid. Her hands dropped to her lap. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and terrified under the floral centerpieces. "I did not donate a single dollar," I continued. I held a small plastic remote in my left hand. I clicked the forward button. The image on the screen zoomed in on the bottom margin of the cancellation document. The 2 signatures filled the wall. "My parents canceled the venue behind my back," I explained to the silent crowd. "They requested a full refund. Because the contract was in my name, only my mother forged my signature on this legal document. She routed the $8,000 into a dormant college checking account to bypass my independent banking. Then she wired the stolen funds to a limited liability company registered to my brother." David gripped the edge of the mahogany table. His knuckles turned white.
"Ruby,"
he hissed, his voice a frantic, desperate whisper meant only for the front row.
"Stop this immediately. Put the microphone down."
I ignored him. I clicked the remote a second time. The screen transitioned. The forged contract disappeared, replaced by the Uniform Commercial Code public filing. It was the 60-month lease agreement from the Automotive Financing Corporation. "I want to show you exactly what kind of technology infrastructure your seed capital purchased," I announced. I clicked the remote a third time. A red digital circle appeared on the screen, highlighting the asset description block and the financial summary. My brother did not use stolen money to hire software developers. I said, maintaining my flat, unwavering delivery. He did not secure a patent. He used the exact sum of $8,000 as a capitalized cost reduction to lease a 2025 Porsche Carrera. The room fractured. The carefully constructed illusion shattered into 1,000 irreversible pieces. At table 4, the fraternity brothers Jackson had been parading around as his primary investors suddenly sat up straight. They looked at the lease agreement on the screen, then stared at Jackson with open disgust. They realized the trendy tech founder they had been following was a bankrupt fraud driving a stolen car. Gregory leaned back in his chair at table 1. He was a man who terminated executives for minor expense account violations. He stared at Patricia and David with cold, unblinking revulsion. Victoria pressed a napkin to her mouth, completely mortified that she had just praised these people in front of her high society friends. Jackson stood frozen on the stage just 3 feet away from me. His charismatic smirk was gone. He looked like a cornered animal. He stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. He had no tech buzzwords left to deploy. The math was displayed on a 10-foot wall, and the math did not lie. David pushed his chair back. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the vinyl floor. He stood up, his face red with a mixture of humiliation and rage.
"That is enough,"
David ordered, taking a step toward the stage.
"You are having a mental breakdown, Ruby. We are ending this right now."
Before David could take a second step, a voice cut through the basement.
"Sit down."
"David." The command was not shouted. It was delivered with the quiet, crushing authority of a matriarch who held the deed to every asset the man possessed. 150 heads turned toward table 8. Evelyn remained seated. She held her glass of sparkling water. She did not raise her voice, but her tone carried the weight of absolute finality. "Sit down," Evelyn repeated, staring her son directly in the eyes.
"And do not speak again until she is finished."
David froze. He looked at his mother. He looked at the corporate executives watching his every move. The fight drained out of him. He slowly sank back into his chair, utterly defeated. I turned my attention away from my family. I looked down at the mahogany table. I looked directly at Liam. Vait. My fiancé was staring at the floor. He was sweating. The pristine corporate management consultant was visibly trembling under the weight of the exposure. Some of you might be wondering why a bride would stand up at her own rehearsal dinner to expose a felony, I said to the crowd. You might be wondering why my fiancé did not handle this privately. I clicked the remote for the final time. The screen went completely black. The darkness forced every eye in the room to focus entirely on the man sitting at the center of table 1. I showed Liam the forged documents weeks ago. I revealed I showed him the proof that my mother committed wire fraud. I expected him to protect our future. Instead, he told me to keep quiet. He told me that calling the police would ruin his networking opportunities with my brother. He chose to hide a felony to protect his corporate optics. Victoria gasped loudly. Richard turned in his chair, staring at his son in absolute horror. Gregory crossed his arms, his expression turning to stone. A consultant who aids and abets financial fraud is a liability no firm can survive. Liam realized his career was evaporating in real time. He realized the high society network he valued above my dignity was currently evaluating him as an accomplice to theft. He panicked. The polished professional mask disintegrated. Liam pushed his chair back violently. He rushed up the 2 wooden steps. He marched across the small stage until he was standing just inches away from me. His face was blotchy and red. He breathed heavily, his chest heaving under his tailored suit. "You are ruining me," Liam hissed. His voice was a venomous whisper intended only for my ears, but captured perfectly by the microphone I still held in my hand. "You are destroying my entire life over a stupid party." I looked at his panicked, sweating face. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just the profound relief of a concluded audit. "I did not ruin you, Liam," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the speakers. "I just provided the documentation. You ruined yourself." I lowered the microphone. I reached down to my left hand. I gripped the diamond engagement ring Liam had given me. I slid the heavy platinum band off my finger. The metal felt cold against my skin. I did not throw the ring at him. I did not make a dramatic gesture. I set the ring down on the clear acrylic podium. The metal made a sharp, distinct click against the hard surface. I turned my back on Liam. I turned my back on my parents and my brother. I walked down the 2 wooden steps, leaving the golden boy and the corporate coward standing on a stage they no longer controlled. I walked down the 2 wooden steps. I stepped onto the white vinyl dance floor. The guests parted in front of me. The wealthy executives, the country club members, the friends of Liam's parents, they all shifted their chairs backward, creating a wide, unobstructed path down the center of the basement. The silence was absolute. I felt lighter. The phantom weight of the platinum band was gone from my left hand. I reached the edge of the dance floor. I did not stop to look back at the stage. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement at table 8. Evelyn stood up. She smoothed the front of her charcoal silk dress. She did not ask for a microphone. When a woman who controls prime Manhattan real estate wants a room to listen, the room listens. Her posture was uncompromising. She walked slowly toward the center of the room, stopping directly in front of table 1. She positioned herself where she could lock eyes with every person who had participated in the gaslighting. Evelyn started with the in-laws. She looked at Victoria and Richard. The wealthy couple sat frozen in their upholstered chairs. Victoria looked up at my grandmother, her previous condescension entirely replaced by rigid apprehension. "Victoria," Evelyn said, her voice was clear, carrying across the basement without a single tremor. "At the engagement dinner, you remarked that it was nice your son was financially accommodating my family. I want to correct the official record tonight." Evelyn let the silence settle over the mahogany table. "Your son did not accommodate us," Evelyn stated. "He accommodated a felony. I am sorry you raised a boy who lacked the spine to protect his partner, but I suppose a corporate coward is easier to manage than a man of conviction. You focus on his networking. I will focus on the fact that he tried to hide a crime to save his cocktail hour invitations." Richard bristled. The senior corporate lawyer opened his mouth to defend his lineage, his face flushing with indignation. Evelyn held up a single manicured hand, silencing him with a simple authoritative gesture. Richard closed his mouth. He realized he was outmatched. Evelyn turned her gaze toward the stage. Jackson was still standing near the acrylic podium, staring blankly at the black projector screen. "Jackson!" Evelyn called out. Her tone shifted from correction to execution. "You built your entire corporate identity around a commercial suite on Spring Street, a suite I own. A suite you occupied for 2 years without paying a single invoice." At table 4, the fraternity brothers exchanged panicked, furious whispers. Jackson gripped the edges of the podium, his knuckles turning pale. "I had my attorneys reclassify your verbal arrangement this morning," Evelyn continued. "A formal 3-day notice to quit was taped to your glass doors. The locks have been changed. You are legally barred from the premises. If you attempt to access the building to retrieve your ping-pong tables, the police will escort you off my property." Jackson opened his mouth. A dry, pathetic stutter emerged. He looked at his fraternity brothers. He looked at Liam. He looked at our parents. The tech visionary narrative was dead buried under a formal eviction notice. He was a fraud standing in a stolen suit, and everyone in the room knew his net worth was 0. Evelyn shifted her attention to the final targets, Patricia and David. My parents looked like they were bracing for a physical impact. Patricia clutched her heavy pearl necklace. David stared down at his empty wine glass, unable to meet his mother's eyes. "David," Evelyn said. Her voice dropped to a register of profound maternal disappointment. "I spent 3 decades subsidizing your vanity. I bought the banknotes when your restaurant failed. I paid the margins when your investments tanked. I let you pretend you were providing for this family, hoping you would eventually learn the value of an honest dollar." Evelyn looked at Patricia. "And you, Patricia," Evelyn said softly. The softness was the most terrifying part. "You decided my granddaughter's milestones were piggy banks for your delusions. You committed wire fraud to buy a sports car. You expected Ruby to absorb the loss and smile in abasement." Patricia squeezed her eyes shut. She deployed her final defense mechanism. The tears began to fall. She let out a loud theatrical sob. She covered her face with her hands, attempting to spend the emotional currency she had relied on her entire life. She waited for someone to comfort her. She waited for David to put an arm around her shoulder. No one moved. The corporate executives watched her weep with clinical disgust. The currency of tears had no exchange rate in this room. The numbers were on the board. The fraud was documented. Crying over the exposure of a theft only highlighted the guilt. Evelyn reached into her small clutch purse. She pulled out a folded piece of heavy stock paper. It was the signature page of the legal packet I had received at the auditing firm. "This afternoon, my estate attorneys finalized the restructuring of my financial portfolio," Evelyn announced to the stunned crowd. "I have officially dissolved the existing family trust. David, Patricia, and Jackson have been permanently removed as beneficiaries." David gasped. His head snapped up. The reality of his new financial destitution crashed into him. Every commercial property, every liquid asset, and every residual holding has been legally transferred into a new, irrevocable trust, Evelyn declared. "The ink is dry. There are no avenues for appeal." Evelyn turned and looked directly at me. Her expression softened, revealing a quiet, fierce pride. "The sole beneficiary of my estate is the only person in this family who actually knows how to audit a ledger," Evelyn told the room. "Ruby." The magnitude of the financial reallocation rippled through the high society guests. Gregory, the senior managing partner, understood the implications immediately. He was sitting next to a family that had just been publicly disinherited and exposed for felony wire fraud. His rising star consultant had tried to cover it up to secure favor with a fake technology founder. Gregory pushed his chair back. He stood up and methodically buttoned his suit jacket. He did not look at Liam. He did not say a single word to Victoria or Richard. He signaled to his wife. They turned away from table 1, inching toward the exit. The other corporate partners followed his lead. They abandoned their half-eaten meals. They abandoned their glasses of expensive wine. They abandoned the networking opportunity. Liam's career was a radioactive hazard, and they were evacuating the blast zone to protect their own reputations. Liam reached out his hand, grasping at the empty air as his bosses walked away.
Gregory,
Liam pleaded.
Gregory, please, we can discuss this on Monday.
Gregory did not turn around. He kept walking. Evelyn folded the legal paper and slid it back into her purse. She did not wait for a response from my parents. The social execution was complete. The illusion had been dismantled, the assets reallocated, and the parasites starved of their oxygen. She walked away from table 1, moving toward the center aisle where I was waiting. We met in the middle of the vinyl dance floor. She offered me a small approving nod. We turned our backs on the chaos. We walked side by side toward the exit. The guests watched us leave in total silence. I could hear Jackson stammering on the stage, trying to explain the eviction to his furious fraternity brothers. I could hear Patricia sobbing at the table. I could hear Liam frantically dialing his phone, trying to reach a senior partner who had just blocked his number. We reached the end of the corridor. The heavy mahogany double doors stood in front of us. I pushed the right door open. Evelyn pushed the left. We stepped out of the dreary floral-scented basement and into the crisp evening air. I let go of the handle. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut. The brass latch clicked into place with a sharp, definitive sound. It was the sound of a clean break. The trap had closed perfectly. Now the surviving entities had to navigate the reality of their new bankrupt existence. 14 days passed. For the first 29 years of my life, my mornings were defined by the chaotic noise of my family. My phone would buzz with manufactured emergencies, demands for my time, and requests for my money. But on the first Monday morning in my new Brooklyn loft, I woke up to something entirely unfamiliar. I woke up to silence. The fallout from the country club basement was swift, clinical, and irreversible. When you remove the financial floor from underneath people who have spent their entire lives floating on stolen capital, gravity takes over very quickly. As an auditor, I did not need to be in the room to understand the math of their collapse. The trajectory of their ruin played out exactly as Evelyn and I had mapped it in her mahogany study. Jackson was the first to fall. The eviction from the Spring Street commercial suite triggered a fatal chain reaction for his fabricated technology startup. When his fraternity brother investors discovered the heavy brass padlock and the legal notice taped to the glass doors, the illusion of his corporate momentum evaporated. They demanded an emergency meeting. They asked to see the application prototype. They asked to review the proprietary source code Jackson had been promising to deliver for 6 months. Jackson had no code. He had no developers. He had nothing but a leased Italian wool suit and a vocabulary of empty industry buzzwords. The investors realized they had been funding a ghost. They walked away, taking their remaining seed money with them. Without the unearned cash flow from his friends, Jackson could not cover his operating expenses. More importantly, he could not cover his vanity expenses. He had to pack up his expensive sneakers and move back into the guest bedroom of my parents' suburban house. The automotive financing corporation that held the lease on his slate gray sports car did not offer grace periods to unemployed tenants. When the first monthly payment bounced due to insufficient funds, the bank initiated standard recovery protocols. I heard about the repossession from a former neighbor who loved neighborhood gossip. It happened on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. A heavy-duty commercial tow truck pulled into my parents' quiet suburban driveway. The hydraulic brakes hissed loudly, drawing the attention of every homeowner on the street. The recovery agent did not knock on the front door to ask for the keys. He simply backed his truck up to the 2025 Porsche Carrera, attached the steel hooks to the undercarriage, and activated the winch. Patricia ran out of the front door wearing her bathrobe. She stood in the driveway waving her arms and trying to negotiate with a tow truck driver who was paid by the hour. David stood on the porch, his face pale, watching the physical proof of his parenting failures being dragged onto a flatbed trailer. Neighbors peeked through their living room blinds, witnessing the public stripping of the Morris family facade in broad daylight. The car was driven away, leaving a dark oil stain on the concrete and a permanent dent in their social standing. My parents panicked. They realized the golden boy was bankrupt. The estate trust was gone, and the daughter they had treated like a banking facility was no longer funding their lifestyle. They tried to call me. They tried to send text messages. I imagine they alternated between begging for a bridge loan to save the car and threatening to sue me for public defamation. I never received a single one of those messages. At 9 o'clock the morning after the rehearsal dinner, I walked into a cellular retail store. I closed my old account. I purchased a new phone and activated a brand new number. I only gave the new contact information to my employer, my grandmother, and my friend Harper. Severing that digital tether provided a psychological release I can barely describe. The role of the family scapegoat is an active dynamic. It requires your participation. The golden boy can only stay elevated if there is someone beneath him absorbing the weight of his failures. The parents can only maintain their delusion of success if they have someone to blame when things go wrong. When you stop participating, the entire equation collapses. I realized I did not have to fix them. I did not have to forgive them. I just had to leave them alone with the consequences of their own math. Liam faced a different kind of calculation. He returned to his corporate consulting firm the following Monday. He wore his best tailored suit, prepared to deploy a smooth public relations narrative to smooth over the events of the dinner. He planned to walk into the senior managing partner office and reframe my presentation as the erratic behavior of a stressed bride. But corporate risk management departments do not care about smooth narratives. They care about liability. Gregory did not invite Liam into his corner office for a friendly chat. He summoned Liam into a glass-walled human resources conference room. Gregory informed my former fiancé that the partners had held an emergency meeting over the weekend. A corporate consultant relies entirely on his judgment, his ethics, and his ability to identify financial risk. Liam had looked at a forged legal document, recognized a felony wire fraud, and advised the victim to hide the crime to protect a cocktail hour. Gregory told Liam he was a radioactive liability. The firm did not terminate him. Firing him would require a formal ethics investigation that might attract unwanted media attention to the consulting group. Instead, they placed him in a permanent corporate purgatory. They stripped Liam of his high-net-worth clients. They removed him from the prestigious merger and acquisition accounts. They canceled his track to senior partner indefinitely. He was reassigned to perform mundane entry-level compliance reviews in a windowless interior office. He became a ghost in his own firm. His networking currency dropped to zero, and he was trapped in a stagnant position, knowing every senior executive in the building viewed him with quiet disgust. While Liam sat in his windowless office, I was standing in the middle of my new living space. Harper had helped me secure a beautiful loft in a historic brick building in Brooklyn. The space featured exposed masonry walls, high ceilings, and massive industrial windows that flooded the hardwood floors with natural sunlight. It was bright, airy, and entirely mine. There was no stained carpet. There were no fluorescent tubes buzzing overhead. It was the exact opposite of the country club basement they had tried to force me into. I spent the weekend unpacking the cardboard boxes I had smuggled out of Astoria under the guise of clothing donations. I placed my grandfather heirloom watch on the nightstand. I organized my auditing textbooks on a sleek metal shelf. Then I reached into the back of the closet and pulled out the opaque garment bag. I unzipped the thick plastic. The heavy silk designer gown caught the afternoon light. It draped beautifully, pooling like liquid silver against the dark hardwood floor. I had purchased a custom brass clothing rack specifically for this purpose. I positioned the rack near the large industrial window. I hung the silk dress on the brass rail. I was never going to wear that dress down an aisle. I was never going to alter it to fit a cheaper venue. I kept it suspended in the sunlight as a permanent trophy. It was a daily reminder of the moment I stood in front of a mirror and decided my dignity was worth more than a counterfeit marriage. I bought the dress in cash, and I bought my freedom with the truth. The loft was quiet. I brewed a cup of coffee and sat on my new sofa, enjoying the steady rhythm of a life where the numbers finally balanced. A sharp buzz from the intercom near the front door broke the silence. I pressed the button, listening to the voice of the building concierge. He informed me that a bonded legal courier was waiting in the lobby with a package requiring my direct signature. I rode the elevator down to the ground floor. The courier wore a dark uniform. He handed me a thick, heavy paper envelope sealed with a red adhesive strip. I signed the electronic clipboard, thanked the man, and carried the envelope back up to my sunlit loft. I recognized the return address printed in crisp black font. It was Arthur the Ruthless estate attorney my grandmother kept on retainer. I sat at my kitchen island and pulled the red tab. The envelope opened smoothly. I slid the dense stack of legal documents onto the counter. The pages were printed on premium watermarked paper. These were the finalized trust agreements. Evelyn had executed her promise with the speed and precision of a seasoned chief executive officer. The documents detailed the irrevocable transfer of her commercial real estate holdings, her liquid investment portfolios, and her residential properties. The clauses were ironclad, establishing an impenetrable legal wall between the assets and my parents. I flipped to the final signature page. Evelyn had signed her name in her elegant slanted cursive. Below her signature was the notary seal stamping the financial excommunication of David, Patricia, and Jackson into permanent public record. My name was listed at the top of the beneficiary schedule. I traced the printed letters of my name with my index finger. I did not inherit the empire because I was the favorite child. I inherited it because I was the only person in the Morris family who refused to be complicit in a fraud. Evelyn handed me the keys because she knew I possessed the strength to lock the doors. My financial independence was cemented. The long, exhausting war was officially over. I placed the documents back into the envelope, feeling a profound sense of closure. The stage was finally clear, leaving only the quiet aftermath and a plane ticket to Paris. 8 months passed. The calendar turned over, taking the harsh winter weather and replacing it with the humid warmth of a New York spring. I did not spend those months looking backward. I focused my energy on the ledgers in front of me. In March, my auditing firm assigned me to investigate a sprawling multi-state hospital network. I spent 6 weeks tracing misallocated funds, eventually uncovering a deep systematic coding error that had drained 7 figures from their surgical departments over 3 years. I documented the discrepancies, presented the hard evidence to the hospital board of directors, and secured the full recovery of the funds. My firm did not reward me with empty buzzwords or a fabricated corporate title. They rewarded me with a formal promotion to lead medical auditor. The new position came with a dedicated corner office, a substantial salary increase, and a performance bonus that landed securely in my independent credit union account on a Tuesday morning. I did not use that bonus to lease a German sports car. I used a fraction of the funds to purchase 2 plane tickets across the Atlantic. Right now, it is a sunny Saturday afternoon in late May. I am sitting at a small round table outside a classic cafe in the 4th arrondissement of Paris. The wrought iron chair is comfortable beneath me. A gentle breeze pulls the scent of fresh espresso and warm pastries through the open terrace. Just across the cobblestone street, the River Seine flows quietly, reflecting the bright blue sky. Tourist boats drift past their wakes, lapping gently against the ancient stone embankments. It is a world away from the harsh fluorescent lighting of a country club basement. Evelyn sits across from me. She wears a tailored white linen blazer and a pair of dark sunglasses. She turned 79 2 months ago, but she looks remarkably younger. For 3 decades, she carried the heavy secret burden of my parents and their endless financial incompetence. She absorbed their failures to protect the family name. Shedding that dead weight has restored a visible, vibrant energy to her posture. She holds a glass of chilled white wine, watching the Parisian pedestrians stroll past our table with quiet amusement. We are separated from New York by an ocean, but the laws of mathematics operate the exact same way back in the United States. Harper, my forensic accountant friend, occasionally forwards me public updates from her network. I do not seek out the information, but I appreciate the symmetry of a balanced ledger. Without the Spring Street commercial suite and the leased luxury vehicle, Jackson lost his primary currency. He could no longer project the illusion of a wealthy technology founder. His fraternity brothers deleted his contact information. His social circle evaporated over the course of a single weekend. He currently works as an assistant shift manager at a regional shipping warehouse in New Jersey. He wears a high-visibility safety vest and steel-toed boots. He clocks in at dawn and spends his days documenting actual logistics, tracking pallets of cardboard boxes on a concrete loading dock. It is honest, demanding work, but it is a harsh reality for a man who believed he was destined for a corner office in Silicon Valley. Patricia and David are navigating a severe downgrade in their lifestyle. David had to formally withdraw his retirement applications. He works mandatory overtime at his middle management job, trying desperately to rebuild the savings they squandered on my brother. Patricia can no longer afford her social performances. She quietly sold her designer handbags and her pearl necklaces on secondary consignment websites to cover the rising property taxes on their suburban home. She no longer hosts lavish dinners or attends local charity galas. She isolated herself, terrified that her neighbors will ask why the golden boy is driving a used sedan and living in his childhood bedroom. Liam is still employed at the corporate consulting firm. The senior partners did not fire him, but they executed a far more effective punishment. They left him in his windowless interior office. He reviews basic compliance forms and checks regulatory paperwork. He is entirely cut off from the high net worth clients and the lucrative merger accounts. Last month, Liam attempted to secure a lateral transfer to a rival consulting agency. During the standard background check, a hiring manager reached out to Gregory for a professional reference. Gregory declined to endorse Liam, citing a concerning lack of ethical judgment regarding financial documentation. The rival agency immediately rescinded the interview offer. Liam is permanently marooned in his cubicle, watching younger associates secure the promotions he once believed were his birthright. I take a sip of my espresso. The porcelain cup clicks softly against the saucer. The most striking element of my new life is not the promotion or the Parisian cafe. It is the unbroken peace. My smartphone rests on the table next to my croissant. The screen is dark. There are no frantic text messages demanding my weekend time. There are no unhinged voicemails ordering me to alter a thrift store dress to subsidize a sushi spread. There is no one asking me to shrink my achievements so a mediocre man can feel exceptional. I do not have to swallow my pride, police my tone, or apologize for expecting basic respect. The energy I used to spend managing their fragile egos is now entirely mine. Evelyn lowers her wine glass. She tells a dry, incredibly sharp story about a commercial real estate developer she outmaneuvered during a zoning dispute in the 1980s. The punchline is brilliant. She leans her head back and laughs. It is a genuine, unburdened sound that carries over the ambient noise of the cafe. I pick up my camera. I frame the shot, capturing the sunlight, catching her silver hair and the unrestrained joy on her face. I press the shutter. The mechanical click freezes the moment forever. It is physical proof of our victory. My name is Ruby Morris. I am 30 years old. I track missing resources for a living, and I finally stopped letting my family steal mine. If you are listening to this and you are sitting in your own version of a windowless basement, I want you to hear me very clearly. They will tell you that family requires sacrifice. They will demand your time, your money, and your silence to maintain their comfort. They will call you selfish when you ask for reciprocity. Do not argue with them. Do not try to make them see your value because they already know your value. That is exactly why they are trying to drain it. They thought I was just the help meant to quietly float their vanity. But when you finally realize your own value, you stop accepting counterfeit love. You do not need to ask for a seat at their table. You just build your own. I sip my espresso, watching the Seine flow quietly under the Parisian sun. The air here does not carry the weight of manufactured emergencies or unearned guilt. For 29 years, I operated under the assumption that my role was to subsidize the vanity of the people who shared my last name. I thought keeping the peace meant quietly paying the tab for their delusions. Looking back at the wreckage of that rehearsal dinner, I learned 3 undeniable truths when I finally closed the ledger on my family. First, your inherent worth is never measured by your utility to others. If a family or a partner only values you for the financial or emotional sacrifices you make in the shadows, they do not love you. They love the convenience you provide. Second, complicity is louder than theft. The person who steals from you is an enemy, but the partner who asked you to hide that theft to protect his own corporate networking is a coward. A true partner stands between you and the fire rather than asking you to quietly burn so they can stay warm. Finally, walking away is the ultimate audit. You do not have to scream negotiate or beg for a seat at a table where you are treated like an afterthought. You have the power to resign from the role they assigned you. The moment you stop accepting counterfeit affection, you realize you can just build your own table. My name is Ruby Morris. I stopped funding the illusion, and I finally started funding my own peace. If you have ever had to close the books on a toxic dynamic, or if this narrative gave you the blueprint you needed, hit the subscribe button, leave a comment below, and share your own exit strategy. Thank you for listening to Hazel Stories. I will see you in the next.